The gavel echoed through the silent courtroom as my husband Daniel sat smugly in his tailored Italian suit, that arrogant smirk never leaving his face. He thought he had orchestrated the perfect plan. He thought he knew everything about me, about my humble past, about what I was supposedly worth. But as Judge Morrison opened that sealed envelope containing my late father's final testament, I watched Daniel's confidence shatter like glass hitting concrete. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice and hidden truths, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It truly helps us bring you more amazing stories like this one. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from around the world. My name is Emma, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones sleeping right next to you. This is a story about betrayal, hidden secrets, and the kind of justice that makes you believe in karma again. 4 years ago, I was living a completely different life. I was Mrs. Emma Rodriguez, married to Daniel Rodriguez, a high-powered corporate lawyer who had everyone fooled, including me. Daniel was everything society told me I should want: charming, educated, successful, and from an old money family in Boston. He drove a BMW, wore watches that cost more than most people's cars, and had the kind of confidence that made everyone in the room turn when he spoke. When we first met at a university alumni event, I was working as a middle school science teacher in a small town outside Portland, Oregon. I was barely scraping by financially, still grieving my father's death from a heart attack just 2 years earlier. I was living in a tiny apartment above Mrs. Henderson's bakery, eating ramen noodles for dinner most nights, and wondering if I'd ever feel whole again after losing the most important person in my world. Daniel swept into my ordinary world like a hurricane of expensive cologne and 5-star restaurants. Our first date was at Le Bernardin, a restaurant so fancy I had to Google the dress code. He ordered wine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget and spoke French to the sommelier like it was nothing. I felt like Cinderella at the ball, completely out of place but desperately wanting to belong. He was attentive in ways I'd never experienced. He sent flowers to my classroom. Not just any flowers, but elaborate arrangements that made my fellow teachers gasp and my students giggle. He'd surprise me with weekend trips to wine country, spa days at luxury resorts, and shopping sprees where he'd insist on buying me dresses that made me feel like a different person entirely. "You're too beautiful to hide behind those conservative teacher clothes," he'd say, picking out revealing dresses and expensive jewelry. "Let me show you how stunning you really are." He proposed after 8 months with a diamond ring that cost more than I made in 6 months. Standing there in that candlelit restaurant overlooking the city, with the ring sparkling like a star in the velvet box, I truly believed I was living in a romantic movie. I thought I had found my soulmate, my partner, my happy ending. The poor girl from the wrong side of the tracks had found her Prince Charming. If you're enjoying this story so far, please give it a thumbs up. It lets me know you want more content like this. But fairy tales, I would soon learn, sometimes have monsters disguised as princes. The red flags started as tiny pinpricks that I brushed off as quirks. During our engagement, Daniel would chuckle when I talked about my students' science fair projects, calling it adorable that I cared so much about kid stuff. When I mentioned wanting to pursue my master's degree to become a school principal, he'd kiss my forehead and say, "Why stress yourself, beautiful? I make enough for both of us. You don't need to exhaust yourself with more schooling." At first I thought it was sweet. He wanted to take care of me, to protect me from stress and financial worry. I'd grown up watching my father work double shifts just to keep food on our table, so the idea of being financially secure was intoxicating. But as the months passed, the comments became more frequent and cutting. At his law firm's cocktail parties, when colleagues asked about my career, Daniel would wave dismissively and say, "Oh, Emma's our little teacher. She plays with test tubes and microscopes while I handle real business." The way he said little teacher made me feel like I was shrinking right there in my expensive dress, the dress he'd bought me, the jewelry he'd chosen, the life he was creating for me. His law partners' wives were all either trust fund babies who'd never worked or former models turned trophy wives. They'd smile politely when Daniel introduced me, but I could see the judgment in their eyes. I didn't belong in their world of charity galas and country club memberships, and Daniel made sure I never forgot it. "Don't try too hard to fit in," he'd whisper in my ear at these events. "Just smile and look pretty. That's what you're good at." But the cruelest cuts came when he talked about my father. Dad had been a maintenance foreman at a lumber mill, a quiet, hard-working man who raised me alone after Mom died when I was 12. He wasn't college-educated or wealthy, but he was the kindest, most principled person I'd ever known. He taught me to change my own oil, balance a checkbook, and stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. Daniel never missed a chance to remind me of my humble beginnings. He'd say things like, "It's okay that your dad was blue-collar, sweetheart. Not everyone can come from established families like mine. That's what makes our love story so romantic." I saw past all that. When I'd get emotional missing Dad, especially around the anniversary of his death, Daniel would sigh dramatically and say, "Emma, you need to move forward. Dwelling on your working-class background won't change anything. You're a Rodriguez now, you need to start acting like it." He'd criticize the way I pronounced certain words, saying I sounded too regional. He bought me books on etiquette and enrolled me in wine-tasting classes, claiming he wanted me to feel comfortable in his world. But every lesson felt like another reminder that who I naturally wasn't good enough. After we married in a lavish ceremony that cost more than my father had made in 3 years, Daniel moved me into his penthouse apartment overlooking Boston Harbor. It was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, artwork that probably cost more than most people's houses. But it felt like living in a museum where I wasn't allowed to touch anything. Daniel controlled every aspect of our life together. He chose my clothes, my hairstyles, even my friends. When my old teaching colleague Maria called to invite me for coffee, Daniel would say, "Sweetheart, you don't have anything in common with her anymore. Why don't you spend time with Rebecca instead?" Rebecca was one of the law partner's wives, a perfectly polished woman who spoke in carefully modulated tones and never seemed to have an original thought. He managed our finances completely, giving me a credit card with a generous limit, but monitoring every purchase. "It's not that I don't trust you," he'd explain, "but I'm better with money. This way you don't have to stress about budgets and investments." When I suggested getting a teaching job in Boston, Daniel was horrified. "Absolutely not. Do you know how that would look? The wife of a senior associate at Henderson. Brooks Associates working at some public school. It would be embarrassing for both of us." Instead, he encouraged me to do volunteer work, the kind of charity work that looked good on society pages but felt hollow and meaningless. I spent my days arranging flowers for fundraisers and attending luncheons where wealthy women discussed their servants and vacation homes while pretending to care about underprivileged children. I missed teaching desperately. I missed the excitement in a child's eyes when they finally understood a difficult concept, the satisfaction of helping struggling students find their confidence, the sense of purpose that came from making a real difference in someone's life. 2.5 years into our marriage, Daniel's true nature began emerging like a poisonous plant breaking through beautiful soil. He started working late constantly, his phone buzzing with mysterious messages he'd answer in private. The romantic gestures disappeared completely. The man who once couldn't stop touching me now barely acknowledged my presence when he came home. Our conversations became purely functional. "Did you pick up my dry cleaning?" "The Hendersons are having us for dinner Saturday." "My mother wants to know if you're pregnant yet." That last question became a constant source of tension. Daniel's family expected grandchildren, and my failure to get pregnant was clearly disappointing everyone. "Maybe you should see a specialist," Daniel suggested one evening, barely looking up from his laptop. "There might be something wrong with you." The way he said, "wrong with you," made me feel broken and defective. I started to wonder if he was right. Maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with me. Maybe I wasn't worthy of love or happiness. Maybe I should be grateful that someone like Daniel had chosen me at all. The emotional abuse was subtle but devastating. Desperate for purpose and connection, I started volunteering at a local community center in one of Boston's rougher neighborhoods. It was the kind of place Daniel's crowd would never step foot in, which made it perfect for me. I began tutoring kids in science and math, and for the first time in years I felt like myself again. One of my students was a 13-year-old named Carlos, whose parents worked multiple jobs just to pay rent. He was brilliant but struggling in school because he had no quiet place to study and no one to help him with homework. I spent hours working with him and slowly watched his grades improve and his confidence grow. "Ms. Emma," he said one day after acing a difficult math test, "you're the first person who ever believed I was smart." Another student, Isabella, was facing pressure to drop out and help support her family. She had dreams of becoming a doctor, but everyone told her it was unrealistic for someone from her background. I worked with her on scholarship applications and helped her prepare for advanced placement exams. When Isabella got accepted to MIT with a full scholarship, she hugged me and cried. "You never gave up on me when everyone else did," she sobbed. "You showed me that where I come from doesn't determine where I can go." These moments reminded me who I really was beneath Daniel's constant criticism. I wasn't the inadequate, ordinary woman he'd convinced me I was. I was a teacher, a mentor, someone who could change lives and inspire dreams. But at home I continued disappearing. Daniel had convinced me I was lucky he'd rescued me from my ordinary life. He'd say things like, "You should be grateful I saw something special in you despite your background. Not many men would have taken a chance on someone like you." The moment that changed everything happened on a rainy Thursday evening in November. I'd just finished tutoring Carlos, who had won second place in a citywide science competition, and I was excited to share the news with Daniel. I came home with Chinese takeout from his favorite restaurant, hoping we could have dinner together and I could tell him about Carlos's achievement. I found him in his study, laughing on the phone. The door was slightly ajar and I could hear his voice clearly as I approached with the food. "Trust me, Kevin, she's completely clueless. It's almost pathetic how naive she is. She actually thinks I married her for love." My blood turned to ice water. I set the takeout down on the hallway table and moved closer to the door. He continued, his voice full of amusement. "Of course I got her to sign a prenup. Do you think I'm an idiot? When I file for divorce next month, she'll get practically nothing. Meanwhile, I'll get everything, including that worthless piece of land her father left her. She signed it over as collateral for our penthouse without even reading the fine print. Can you believe that?" Daniel's laughter felt like knives in my chest. "She's been so easy to manipulate, Kevin. A few expensive dinners, some jewelry, and she handed over everything. I convinced her she was too simple to understand financial matters, so she just signs whatever I put in front of her." I heard Kevin's muffled response through the phone. Then Daniel burst out laughing again. "You're absolutely right. I deserve an Oscar for this performance. 3.5 years of pretending to love someone so boring and beneath me, but it'll all be worth it when I cash out. Do you know how much I'll clear after this divorce? Between her father's land as collateral and the prenup, I'll walk away with everything while she gets just enough to rent some studio apartment in the suburbs." "The best part," Daniel continued, "is how grateful she is for everything I've done for her. She genuinely believes I elevated her from her pathetic little life. She has no idea I've been planning this exit strategy since our engagement. I've been documenting every penny I've spent on her, every gift, every vacation. It'll all work in my favor when we go to court." Kevin must have asked about timing, because Daniel said, "Soon. I'm just waiting for the partnership decision at the firm. Once that's locked in, I don't need the stable family man image anymore. I can finally be done with this charade and find someone actually worthy of my status." That night, I lay next to Daniel, listening to him sleep peacefully while my entire world crumbled around me. Everything made perfect, horrible sense now. The legal documents he'd had me sign for our financial security, the way he'd isolated me from my old friends and life, the systematic destruction of my self-esteem. He'd been planning this betrayal from day one. I thought about our wedding day, how radiant I'd felt walking down the aisle toward the man I thought loved me. I remembered signing document after document at the lawyer's office, Daniel's hand on my shoulder as he explained that married couples needed to protect their assets. "It's just paperwork, sweetheart," he'd said. "Trust me to handle the boring legal stuff." I'd trusted him completely. I'd signed everything he put in front of me because I believed we were building a life together. Instead, I'd been signing my life away to a man who saw me as nothing more than a mark in a long con. The next morning, Daniel kissed my cheek and told me to have a wonderful day, darling. His voice honey-sweet with fake affection. If I hadn't heard that phone call, I never would have suspected the monster behind the mask. He was that good at his performance. I might be late tonight, he said, adjusting his tie in our bedroom mirror. Big case coming to trial, but don't wait up for me. I wondered if he was really working late or if he was already seeing someone else. Probably someone from his social circle, someone who fit his world better than a small-town teacher ever could. I called in sick to the community center, something I'd never done unless I was genuinely ill. I spent the day examining every document I'd signed during our marriage, spread across our dining room table like evidence at a crime scene. The picture that emerged was devastating and brilliant in its calculated cruelty. Daniel had maneuvered me into signing away my rights to almost everything I owned, including Dad's small piece of land in rural Oregon. What I'd thought were routine financial documents were actually sophisticated legal instruments designed to protect his assets while leaving me with nothing. The prenuptial agreement was particularly brutal. In the event of divorce, I would receive a small settlement, enough to maintain a modest lifestyle for 2 years. Everything else, including any property brought into the marriage, would remain with Daniel if it had been used as collateral for joint debts. A week later, Daniel came home with roses and champagne, acting unusually romantic. He'd picked up sushi from the expensive place in Back Bay and even lit candles in our dining room. Now that I knew the truth, his sudden attention felt sinister rather than sweet. "Emma, darling," he said, sitting beside me on our cream leather couch after dinner, "we need to have an honest conversation about our marriage." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my voice steady. "What kind of conversation?" He took my hands with practiced gentleness, his thumb rubbing across my wedding ring, the symbol of what I'd thought was our eternal love. "I think we both know we've grown apart over the years. We want different things from life. I believe it would be healthier and more honest for both of us to end this marriage amicably." "You want a divorce?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. He nodded solemnly, his expression perfectly crafted to show regret and mature wisdom. "I've been thinking about this for months, sweetheart. We're both still young enough to start over, to find relationships that truly fulfill us. I don't want either of us to waste more years being unhappy." The performance was flawless. If I hadn't heard that phone call, I might have actually believed he cared about my happiness. "I know this is difficult," he continued, "but I've already consulted with my attorney to make this as painless as possible for you. You won't have to worry about legal fees or complicated procedures. I'll handle everything." How thoughtful of you, I thought, but managed to say, "That's very considerate." Daniel reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with legal documents. "I've had all the paperwork prepared by the best family law firm in the city. Everything is very straightforward. You'll receive a generous settlement that will let you start fresh, maybe rent a nice apartment closer to your volunteer work, even go back to school if you want to pursue that master's degree we talked about." The way he said it made it sound like he was doing me an enormous favor, granting me permission to pursue my dreams now that I was no longer his responsibility. I stared at the envelope, my hands trembling with rage, not fear. "What about our home?" "Well, the penthouse is in my name since I provided the entire down payment and have been making all the mortgage payments. But don't worry, I'm not heartless. The settlement I'm offering is quite generous, especially considering—" He trailed off diplomatically. "Considering what?" "Well, considering you didn't contribute financially to our marriage. I mean, your volunteer work is admirable, but it doesn't exactly build wealth." His smile was patronizing, like he was explaining basic economics to a child. "And my father's land?" Daniel's mask slipped for just a microsecond, a flash of something cold and calculating before the fake sympathy returned. "Emma, sweetheart, we've been through this before. That land is collateral for our mortgage here. When we sell the penthouse, we'll need to settle that debt first. But like I said, the settlement will more than take care of you." The lies rolled off his tongue like silk, smooth and expensive and completely artificial. If I hadn't heard that phone call, he might have convinced me he was being not just fair, but generous. "I need time to think," I said carefully. Daniel's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, the first crack in his perfect facade. "Of course, darling, take all the time you need. but my attorney says filing sooner rather than later makes the process smoother and less expensive for everyone involved. I'd hate for legal fees to eat into your settlement. Even his rush to finalize everything was disguised as concern for my well-being. The divorce papers were exactly what I expected. A financial massacre disguised as a fair settlement. I would get $75,000, barely enough to rent a modest apartment for 2 years if I lived very carefully. Daniel would keep the penthouse, worth over $2 million, the cars, the investment accounts, his partnership in the law firm, and yes, my father's 20 acres in rural Oregon. According to his lawyers, Dad's land would be sold to satisfy marital debt associated with the primary residence, with any proceeds going to Daniel as compensation for his disproportionate financial contributions to the marriage. The language was cold and clinical, reducing my father's final gift to me to nothing more than Daniel's financial planning. I was looking at losing everything, including my last physical connection to Dad. But I wasn't the helpless victim Daniel thought I was. I took a personal day from my volunteer work and drove to the office of Patricia Hawthorne, a divorce attorney recommended by Isabella's mother, who had been through a similar situation with her ex-husband. The office was in a modest building in Cambridge, nothing like the marble and mahogany grandeur of Daniel's firm, but something about its unpretentious professionalism made me feel hopeful. Patricia was a steel-haired woman in her 50s who listened to my story with the focused intensity of a prosecutor building a case. She took notes in a neat, precise handwriting and asked probing questions that showed she understood exactly what Daniel had done to me. "Emma," she said when I finished, spreading the divorce papers across her desk, "I'll be honest with you. If you signed all these documents without independent legal counsel, we're facing a significant uphill battle. Your husband's lawyers were extremely thorough and sophisticated in their approach." My heart sank. "So I just lose everything?" "Not necessarily, but we need to be very strategic and very thorough in our investigation. Tell me about your father's land. You said it was all he left you?" I nodded, feeling the familiar ache of grief. "It's nothing special. Just 20 acres of empty property with an old barn that's probably falling down by now. Dad bought it years ago, but he never developed it or did anything with it. Daniel always said it was perfect for collateral because it wasn't worth much, maybe $20,000 at most." Patricia leaned forward intently, her pen poised over her legal pad. "Emma, when was the last time that land was professionally appraised? Do you have any recent documentation of its current market value?" I shook my head. "Daniel handled all our finances. He said the bank did some kind of assessment when we used it as collateral, but he told me it came back as basically worthless, except for the sentimental value." "I think we need to get that property professionally appraised immediately," Patricia said, making a note. "And I want to do a comprehensive investigation into your father's financial records. You'd be amazed how often people underestimate their inheritance, especially when someone else has been managing their finances and controlling the information they receive." 3 weeks later, Patricia called me with news that didn't just change my day, it changed my entire understanding of my father and my life. "Emma, you need to sit down for this conversation. I was at the community center, helping Carlos with his college application essays, but I stepped outside into the hallway for privacy." "What did you find?" "First, your father's land. It's not just empty property, Emma. According to geological surveys filed with the state over the past 5 years, there's a significant rare earth mineral deposit underneath your 20 acres. These are minerals essential for manufacturing computer chips, electric car batteries, and renewable energy equipment." My legs felt weak. I slid down the wall to sit on the floor of the community center hallway. "What does that mean?" "It means a consortium of technology companies has been quietly trying to purchase mineral rights in that exact area for the past 3 years. Your 20 acres, given its location and the quality of the mineral deposit, could be worth anywhere from $6 million to $10 million. I couldn't breathe. "That's impossible. Dad was a mill foreman. He lived paycheck to paycheck. He shopped at thrift stores and drove a 20-year-old pickup truck." "That's not all, Emma. I also discovered a trust account your father established in your name before he died. The bank has been trying to locate you for over 2 years, but your married name threw them off their search. They had you listed as Emma Thompson, not Emma Rodriguez." A trust account? My voice sounded strange and distant to my own ears. Your father was apparently much more financially sophisticated than anyone realized. He'd been investing small amounts of money for decades. Very smart, very conservative choices. Blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, index funds. With compound interest and some particularly excellent technology stock picks he made in the early 2000s, that account is now worth $1.8 million. I was crying now right there in the community center hallway, but they were tears of amazement rather than grief. There's more, Patricia continued gently. There's also a sealed letter he left specifically for you, with instructions that it only be opened when you accessed the trust, or in the event that you were getting divorced. Emma, I think your father knew exactly what kind of man you might marry. That afternoon I sat in Patricia's office reading my father's letter through a veil of tears, finally understanding the depth of his love and wisdom. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I pray with all my heart that you're safe and happy. But if you're reading this because someone is trying to take advantage of you, then I'm grateful I had the foresight to protect you. I know you think I was just a simple mill worker who didn't understand money or the wider world. I let you think that because I wanted you to grow up humble and kind, not spoiled or entitled. But the truth is, I've been preparing for your future since the day you were born. Every overtime shift I worked, every dollar I invested, every sacrifice I made was for this moment, to make sure you'd be protected no matter what life throws at you. I've seen too many good people, especially women, taken advantage of by those they trusted most. The land I bought will be valuable someday. I could see the development and technology companies moving into that region, and I did my research on what was underneath our soil. I bought that property not for what it was, but for what it would become. I set up this trust to stay completely separate from any marriage you might have, because I've witnessed too many women lose everything to charming men who saw them as targets rather than partners. The money in this account represents 30 years of careful saving and investing. I lived below my means so you could live above yours. But more than the money or the land, I want you to remember this. Your worth has never been measured by your bank account, your job title, or what others think of you. Your worth is measured by your kindness, your integrity, your intelligence, and the positive impact you have on others. I've watched you teach Sunday school children, help your classmates with their homework, and show compassion to everyone you meet. You have a gift for seeing the potential in people and helping them achieve it. That gift is worth more than any amount of money. Don't let anyone, husband, friend, or family member, ever make you feel small or unworthy. You are the daughter of William Thompson, and you come from a long line of people who worked hard, saved smart, and never gave up. If someone has tried to take advantage of your trust and kindness, use these resources to protect yourself and build the life you deserve. But remember, the real victory isn't in having money. It's in knowing your own worth and never letting anyone convince you otherwise. All my love, always and forever. Dad. P.S. I've also left detailed investment advice in a separate envelope. I may have been a mill foreman, but I spent every evening for 30 years studying the stock market. You might be surprised by what this old blue-collar worker learned about building wealth. I was sobbing as Patricia handed me tissues, but these were tears of overwhelming love and gratitude. My father hadn't just left me money. He'd left me dignity, security, and the knowledge that I was loved beyond measure. Emma, Patricia said gently, your father was extraordinary. The investment strategy he used was sophisticated and brilliant. He essentially created a multi-generational wealth-building plan, starting with a mill worker's salary. Does Daniel know about any of this? Not unless you told him. And based on everything you've described, I'm certain he has no idea what he's really dealing with. He saw a small-town teacher from a working-class family and thought he could manipulate you out of some worthless land. He has no clue that he's attempted to defraud someone worth over $8 million. The irony was so perfect it was almost funny. Daniel had married me thinking he was getting a poor, naive woman he could easily control and financially exploit. Instead, he'd married the daughter of one of the smartest financial planners I'd ever heard of. The final hearing was scheduled for a frigid Monday morning in February. I woke up that day feeling a mixture of nervousness and fierce anticipation. Daniel had no idea what was coming. He arrived at the courthouse looking like he owned the building, flanked by 3 lawyers from Henderson, Brooks Associates, Boston's most expensive and prestigious family law firm. His lead attorney, James Morrison, no relation to our judge, was legendary for his ruthless efficiency in high-stakes divorces. Daniel was wearing his most expensive suit, the one he'd bought for his law firm's annual gala, and his Harvard Law School tie. He kept glancing at me with a mixture of pity and barely concealed smugness, clearly anticipating not just victory but a complete rout. During the pre-hearing conference, I heard him whisper to his lawyer, "This should be quick. She can't afford to fight this, and honestly, she doesn't understand legal proceedings well enough to cause problems." Judge Sarah Morrison entered the courtroom precisely on time. She was a formidable woman in her early 60s, known throughout the Boston legal community for her sharp intellect, thorough preparation, and absolute intolerance for deception or manipulation. Daniel's confidence seemed to waver slightly when he saw her. Judge Morrison had a reputation for being particularly tough on lawyers who tried to take advantage of non-attorney spouses. "We're here today to finalize the divorce between Daniel Rodriguez and Emma Rodriguez," Judge Morrison began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "I've reviewed the initial filings, and I understand there are disputed assets and questions about the proposed settlement terms." Daniel's lead attorney stood with practiced confidence. "Your Honor, the disputed assets are quite minimal in scope. The primary marital property consists of the family residence in Boston Harbor and associated investment accounts, all of which were funded entirely through Mr. Rodriguez's substantial income as a senior associate at a major law firm." Judge Morrison nodded. "And what is your client's position regarding Mrs. Rodriguez's inherited property?" Mrs. Rodriguez inherited a small parcel of undeveloped rural land from her late father. However, this property was voluntarily pledged by Mrs. Rodriguez as collateral for the marital residence. Given the debt structure of the marriage, Mr. Rodriguez believes this property should be liquidated to satisfy the outstanding mortgage obligation, with any minimal remaining proceeds divided according to the prenuptial agreement. The lawyer's tone was dismissive, almost bored, as if we were discussing pocket change rather than my father's final gift to me. Judge Morrison turned her sharp gaze to me. "Mrs. Rodriguez, how do you respond to this characterization of your inherited assets?" I stood up, my heart pounding, but my voice surprisingly steady. "Your Honor, I believe there are some critically important facts about my inheritance that need to be brought to this court's attention." Patricia rose gracefully beside me, her arms full of folders and documents. "Your Honor, we have substantial new evidence regarding Mrs. Rodriguez's inheritance that is directly relevant to these proceedings and calls into question the validity of the proposed settlement." Daniel looked puzzled, but not particularly concerned. His lead attorney whispered something to him, and he just shrugged slightly, still confident this was merely a delay tactic that would ultimately fail. "Proceed, Counselor," Judge Morrison said, settling back in her chair with the air of someone prepared to hear something interesting. Patricia opened her briefcase with the deliberate care of someone who knew she was about to detonate a bomb. "Your Honor, Mrs. Rodriguez's father, William Thompson, was a far more sophisticated financial planner than anyone, including his daughter, realized during his lifetime." She pulled out the first set of documents. Upon his death, Mr. Thompson left his daughter 2 substantial assets. The first is the land in question, which recent geological surveys commissioned by the Oregon Department of Natural Resources have determined contains significant rare earth mineral deposits. Daniel's confident posture began to falter slightly. These minerals, specifically neodymium, dysprosium, and terbium, are essential components in renewable energy technology, electric vehicle manufacturing, and advanced electronics. A consortium of major technology companies, including subsidiaries of Apple, Tesla, and Google, have been actively seeking to purchase mineral rights in this exact geographic area. Patricia paused for dramatic effect, then delivered the killing blow. Professional appraisal of Mrs. Rodriguez's 20 acres, taking into account both the surface property and the mineral rights, establishes a current market value of $8.2 million. The color didn't just drain from Daniel's face, it fled like it was being chased. His mouth fell open, and I heard one of his lawyers mutter a very unprofessional curse word under his breath. The second asset, Patricia continued smoothly, is a trust account that Mr. Thompson established specifically to remain separate from any marital property his daughter might acquire. She produced a thick folder of financial documents. Mr. Thompson spent 30 years making careful, strategic investments using a sophisticated but conservative approach to wealth building. This trust account, which has been growing untouched for over 4 years, currently contains $1.8 million. Judge Morrison raised both eyebrows. Mr. Rodriguez, were you aware of the true value of these assets when you proposed this settlement? Daniel's lawyers were frantically whispering among themselves, but Daniel seemed to be in complete shock. His voice came out as barely more than a croak. No, Your Honor. I was completely unaware of any significant value. Your Honor, Patricia said, her voice taking on the sharp edge of a prosecutor moving in for the kill. We also have compelling evidence that Mr. Rodriguez deliberately attempted to defraud his wife of these assets, while knowing or having reason to know their true value. Daniel finally found his voice. That's absolutely untrue, Your Honor. Patricia produced a digital recorder and a stack of transcripts. We have recorded conversations where Mr. Rodriguez explicitly discusses his plan to manipulate his wife into signing away her inheritance through fraudulent divorce proceedings. The courtroom was so quiet you could have heard a pen drop. Judge Morrison leaned forward with intense interest. Play the recording, Counselor. Patricia pressed play, and Daniel's voice filled the courtroom with crystal clarity. Trust me, Kevin, she's completely clueless. It's almost pathetic how naive she is. She actually thinks I married her for love. Of course I got her to sign a prenup. Do you think I'm an idiot? When I file for divorce next month, she'll get practically nothing. Meanwhile, I'll get everything, including that worthless piece of land her father left her. The recording continued with Daniel's laughter, echoing through the silent courtroom. She's been so easy to manipulate. A few expensive dinners, some jewelry, and she handed over everything. I convinced her she was too simple to understand financial matters. Judge Morrison's expression grew darker with each word. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Your Honor, Patricia continued, we have additional evidence showing that Mr. Rodriguez has been systematically isolating his wife, controlling her finances, and positioning himself to steal her inheritance while making her believe she was fortunate to receive his generous settlement offer. She produced another folder. We also have documentation showing that Mr. Rodriguez researched the mineral rights in Oregon as early as 2 years ago, suggesting he may have had knowledge of the land's true value while convincing his wife it was worthless. Daniel shot to his feet, his composure completely shattered. Your Honor, that's taken completely out of context. I was just— Sit down, Mr. Rodriguez, Judge Morrison commanded, her voice like ice. You'll have your opportunity to respond. Judge Morrison spent several long minutes reviewing the documents Patricia had presented, the only sound in the courtroom the rustling of papers. Finally, she looked up, her gaze moving between Daniel and me with the intensity of a laser. Mr. Rodriguez, she began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Based on the evidence presented today, it appears you have engaged in a systematic campaign to defraud your wife of her rightful inheritance while manipulating her into believing she should be grateful for your deception. Daniel looked like he was about to be sick. Your Honor, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, Judge Morrison interrupted sharply, was your wife's belief that you married her for love rather than as part of an elaborate financial fraud scheme. She turned to me, her expression softening slightly. Mrs. Rodriguez, you will retain complete and absolute ownership of all inherited assets. The land, the mineral rights, the trust fund, and any associated income or appreciation. These assets are clearly separate property that your husband attempted to obtain through fraudulent means. I felt Patricia squeeze my hand under the table, as tears of relief began to flow. Judge Morrison's gaze returned to Daniel, like a hawk focusing on prey. Furthermore, given the clear and convincing evidence of attempted fraud, financial abuse and systematic deception, I am voiding the prenuptial agreement in its entirety due to fraud, duress, and failure to disclose material facts. Daniel's lead attorney tried to object. "Your Honor, we request time to—" "Request denied," Judge Morrison cut him off. "Mrs. Rodriguez will receive 50% of all marital assets acquired during your marriage, including 50% of the penthouse apartment, 50% of all investment accounts, and 50% of Mr. Rodriguez's partnership interest in Henderson Brooks Associates." Daniel's jaw dropped so far I thought it might hit the defendant's table. His net worth had just been cut in half, while mine had increased by millions. "But, Your Honor," Daniel's lawyer tried desperately, "the partnership agreement will need to be reviewed by Mrs. Rodriguez's counsel to determine her rights as a spouse," Judge Morrison replied firmly. "Additionally, I am awarding Mrs. Rodriguez all legal fees and court costs associated with these proceedings." She leaned forward, fixing Daniel with a stare that could have melted steel. "Mr. Rodriguez, your behavior in this matter has been despicable. You targeted a grieving young woman, isolated her from her support systems, systematically destroyed her self-esteem, and attempted to steal her inheritance while convincing her she should be grateful for your abuse." The judge's voice rose slightly with controlled anger. "You are an officer of the court, sworn to uphold justice and integrity. Instead, you have engaged in the kind of predatory behavior that brings shame to the entire legal profession." She looked at the court reporter. "Let the record reflect that I am referring this matter to the Massachusetts Board of Bar Overseers for investigation into Mr. Rodriguez's fitness to practice law." Daniel's face went white as paper. A bar investigation could result in suspension or even disbarment, effectively ending his legal career. "Furthermore," Judge Morrison continued, "I am ordering Mr. Rodriguez to have no contact with Mrs. Rodriguez except through counsel. Any attempt to intimidate, harass, or manipulate her will result in immediate contempt of court charges." As we left the courthouse, the February wind whipping through downtown Boston, Daniel caught up with me in the parking lot. Gone was the polished, confident lawyer. He looked desperate, broken, and smaller than I'd ever seen him. "Emma, please, we need to talk. This is all a huge misunderstanding." I turned to face him, and for the first time in 4 years, I felt completely powerful. Patricia stood beside me, a protective presence reminding me I was no longer alone. "No, Daniel. The misunderstanding was mine. I thought you loved me. I did love you. I do love you." His voice cracked with desperation. "You loved the idea of stealing everything I had while making me believe I was worthless. You loved feeling superior to the simple teacher from the wrong side of the tracks. You loved having someone you could control and manipulate while planning to destroy her financially. That's not fair, Emma. You don't understand the pressure I was under." "I heard you, Daniel. I heard you laughing about how easy I was to control, how you deserved an award for pretending to love someone so boring and beneath you. I heard you planning to steal my father's land while telling me it was worthless." His face went white with the realization that his entire scheme had been exposed. "You were listening to that call?" "I was coming to share good news about one of my students with my husband. Instead, I discovered my husband was a fraud, a thief, and a sociopath." Daniel grabbed my arm desperately. "Emma, please, we can work this out. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. I'll change. I'll go to therapy. We can start over." I pulled away firmly, amazed by how small and powerless his grip felt now. "Daniel, you spent 4 years systematically destroying my self-worth. You convinced me I was lucky anyone would want me. You used every opportunity to remind me that I came from nothing and should be grateful you rescued me from my pathetic life." "I was wrong about that," he said frantically. "I see that now. I was completely wrong about everything. You were wrong about everything that mattered. Wrong about my father. Wrong about me. Wrong about what constitutes real worth in this world. But most of all, you were wrong about thinking you could steal from me and get away with it." I walked toward my car, the modest Honda I'd insisted on keeping despite Daniel's embarrassment about it, then turned back one final time. "Oh, and Daniel, that boring, ordinary teacher you married, the one you thought came from nothing, she's worth more than you'll ever be, and I'm not talking about the money." I drove away that day, feeling a mixture of emotions I'd never experienced before: relief, vindication, grief for the years I'd lost, and overwhelming gratitude for my father's wisdom and love. But most of all, I felt powerful in a way I hadn't since before I met Daniel. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, financial planning, and personal rediscovery. Patricia helped me navigate the complex process of claiming my inheritance and dissolving my marriage to a man who had never truly been my partner. The mineral rights alone generated enough income to ensure I'd never have to worry about money again. But more importantly, they gave me the freedom to choose how I wanted to spend my life rather than just survive it. Daniel's legal troubles were just beginning. The bar investigation Patricia had mentioned resulted in a formal complaint being filed against him for conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice. His law firm, terrified of the scandal and potential liability, quietly asked him to resign his partnership and seek employment elsewhere. Word spread quickly through Boston's tight-knit legal community about what he had done. In a profession where reputation and trust are everything, Daniel found himself essentially blacklisted from the top-tier firms he'd always considered beneath him. Last I heard, he was working at a small personal injury firm in suburban Worcester, making a fraction of what he'd earned at Henderson Brooks Associates. The penthouse was sold to pay for the divorce settlement, and he was living in a modest apartment much like the one he'd expected me to end up in. With my newfound financial security, I was finally free to live according to my own values rather than Daniel's expectations. I left the volunteer work at the community center to take a position as head of the science department at Boston Academy, a prestigious private school that served students from all economic backgrounds. Using a portion of my inheritance, I established the William Thompson Foundation, named for my father, which provides full scholarships to academically gifted students from working-class families. Every year, we send dozens of kids like Carlos and Isabella to top-tier universities, proving that potential exists everywhere if someone is willing to nurture it. I also purchased a beautiful Victorian house in Cambridge, not far from Harvard, but in a neighborhood where real families lived, not just trust fund babies and social climbers. It has a large garden where I grow vegetables like my father taught me, and a library where I can read in peace, without anyone telling me my interests aren't sophisticated enough. Carlos, the student I'd been tutoring when my world fell apart, was accepted to MIT with a full scholarship. He's studying engineering now, and stops by occasionally to update me on his progress. "Ms. Emma," he told me recently, "you taught me that where you come from doesn't determine where you can go. Now, I want to teach other kids the same thing." Isabella became a pre-med student at Harvard and volunteers with the foundation during her breaks. She's planning to become a pediatric surgeon and work in underserved communities. "You showed me that believing in someone can change their entire life trajectory," she said. "I want to do that for other kids. These young people and dozens of others like them remind me daily that my father was right. Real worth isn't measured in bank accounts or social status. It's measured in the positive impact we have on others and the legacy we leave behind." Looking back now, I realize Daniel actually did me a favor, though it took me years to see it that way. His betrayal forced me to discover not just my father's hidden gifts, but my own strength and worth. I learned that I didn't need anyone's validation or protection. I was capable of protecting myself. More importantly, I learned to trust my own judgment again. The quiet voice inside me that had always known something was wrong with Daniel's treatment of me, that voice had been right all along. I just needed to learn to listen to it instead of letting someone else's louder voice drown it out. The money was wonderful, of course. Financial security is a tremendous blessing, and I'll never take it for granted. But the real treasure my father left me wasn't the trust fund or the mineral-rich land. It was the knowledge that I was loved unconditionally and considered worthy of protection and investment. Daniel had tried to convince me that I should be grateful for his attention, that someone like me was lucky to be chosen by someone like him. But my father's legacy proved the opposite. I was worthy of real love, honest partnership, and genuine respect. I just needed to stop accepting less than I deserved. 5 years after that courtroom victory, my life bears no resemblance to the prison Daniel had created for me. I wake up every morning in my own home, surrounded by books I chose, wearing clothes I like, planning a day that reflects my values and interests. I'm engaged to Marcus Chen. Yes, I know, another lawyer. But this one is different in every way that matters. Marcus is a public defender who works with indigent clients and believes passionately in justice for everyone, not just those who can afford expensive representation. He knew about my inheritance before he proposed, and his reaction was to suggest we use some of it to expand legal aid services for domestic abuse survivors. "Emma," he said when I told him my whole story, "your father raised an incredible daughter. Daniel was too stupid and selfish to see what he had, but his loss is my gain." Marcus has never once made me feel small or inadequate. He celebrates my work with the foundation, brags about my students' achievements to anyone who will listen, and treats my humble background as a source of strength rather than shame. When we marry next spring, we're signing a prenup that protects both our assets, not from each other, but for the foundation and the work we want to do together. Daniel, meanwhile, has largely disappeared from Boston's social scene. His attempts to rebuild his career have been hampered by his reputation, and several lawyers have told me he's struggling both financially and professionally. I don't take pleasure in his downfall. I just feel grateful that I escaped before he could do even more damage. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never heard that phone call, if I'd signed those divorce papers and walked away with nothing but the small settlement he'd offered. I would have spent the rest of my life believing I was worth exactly what he said I was worth, practically nothing. Instead, I learned that sometimes the people who underestimate us most are doing us the greatest favor of all. They force us to look deeper, fight harder, and ultimately discover reserves of strength we never knew we possessed. The most beautiful irony of this whole story is that Daniel thought he was so smart, so sophisticated, so much better than the simple mill foreman's daughter he'd married. He saw my father as an ignorant blue-collar worker and me as an easy mark ripe for exploitation. But my father, the man Daniel looked down on, had outsmarted him at every turn. While Daniel was spending his money on expensive suits and fancy restaurants to impress people, Dad was quietly building wealth and planning for my future. While Daniel was learning how to manipulate and deceive, Dad was teaching me integrity and resilience. In the end, the simple mill foreman's financial planning and foresight defeated the sophisticated lawyer's elaborate fraud scheme. The ordinary teacher turned out to be worth more than the successful attorney could ever dream of being. But more than that, this experience taught me that worth isn't something someone else gets to determine for us. Daniel spent years trying to convince me I was lucky to have him, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection and respect he chose to throw my way. My father's legacy reminded me that I had always been worthy of real love, genuine respect, and honest partnership. I just needed to stop accepting less and start demanding more. Sometimes the people who underestimate us the most give us the greatest motivation to prove them wrong. But the real victory isn't in showing them what we're worth, it's in finally knowing it ourselves. And once you truly know your own worth, no one can ever convince you to accept less than you deserve again. Thank you so much for watching this incredible story of justice and hidden strength. Until next time, remember, you are worth more than anyone else gets to decide. Subscribe for more amazing stories. See you in the next one.